Welcome to the Content Strategy Insights podcast, where accomplished content strategy experts share their wisdom with our friends in the content community. We talk with professionals who work across the span of content strategy, from small businesses to big enterprises, from content design to content marketing, from solo consultancies to huge agencies. Our mission is to democratize content strategy, to make its principles and practices accessible to everyone. And now, here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 44 of the Content Strategy Insights podcast. I'm really happy today to have with us Mike Atherton. Mike is he's best known, and the reason I asked him on the show is because of his book, Designing Connected Content. I'll tell you a little bit. Mike has, like a lot of us old timers in the field, he has a broad background, and I'll let him articulate his current role. But I was interested in your information architecture background. That's kind of and how you've elegantly stitch that into the content strategy profession. How did you come to do that?
Oh, well, hey, Larry, thanks for letting me on the show. It's good to be another old-timer. That's information architecture started for me. I mean, it was, there's a famous book that came out by Peter Morville and Lou Rosenfeld called lovingly known as the Polar Bear book.
Yep.
And that happened at a time when I was sort of cutting my teeth in sort of the mid to late 90s. And it was fascinating that it was an answer to the things I'd been doing intuitively as a so-called sort of like online new media graphics designer, as you know, we tried to stumble to define them in those days. And then realizing that there was this reason why, it was kind of hard to like figure out what should go in the menu and how things should be organized. And that felt like a slightly different problem-solving skill to laying out things on a page, for example. And so when, this I think it was once called the pain with no name about 20 odd years ago, was then dubbed information architecture. I thought, that's actually the bit that I'm really interested in, more so than sort of color palettes and typography and things.
Right. I remember well when it was 98 that book came out, and I remember thinking, oh, good. Because I was struggling similarly at the time. But didn't information architecture, that kind of has a different connotation and meaning. It kind of came out of computer science, and there's a more specific meaning to it there. But I think that book was the first to sort of adapt it to the web and the... Yeah, well,
these things have come from library science and all kinds of different backgrounds. Again, it's all about kind of figuring out how things are different to each other and how they're related. And that pretty much has defined my career for the last 20 odd years, in different forms.
Right, and stitching that together. Well, I think one of the insights that I really appreciated about the book and the Designing Connected Content book is how you took those information architecture insights and that whole field really, and sort of just elegantly stitched it into the content strategy practice with that. And it starts with, I think the big insight that I really appreciated was the domain modeling, and what a powerful tool that is in so many ways. How did that come about? I kind of infer from what you said how it might have happened, but tell me how that came to be.
Well, 10 odd years ago now, I was working at the BBC. The BBC, have some of the best TV archives in the world. Amazing, rich multimedia, TV and radio content going back 50 odd years. And yet their web strategy at the time was to have all these kind of small little siloed teams attached to different TV shows and regional and national TV shows and radio stations, individually making what we would think of as effectively microsites in flat HTML, and they weren't really connected up together. There were all these kind of little different web presences, like tents on a hillside. I think there was like 200 top-level domains at some point, and then. What happened politically was that the BBC was going to get their digital resources cut in half, so they suddenly had a lot less money to play with. And somebody had the bright idea, well, hey, we've got all 50 years of amazing content in the archives. The web is now advancing to a point where sort of video is almost becoming the default sort of content type. Why don't we start to stitch this stuff together? And a bunch of people that I was introduced to and was very fortunate to work with were taking this technique, domain modeling, whereby you take a particular subject area, be it history or gardening or food or well, anything, sort of theme parks.
Disney theme parks is a thing of yours, I know.
Yeah. And you say, well, okay, what are the things in that world? What are they called? And how do they connect to each other? So, a theme park brand, there typically is a resort, and that resort might have a number of parks like you get in Disney World, and you have places of Magic Kingdom, and you have Epcot and those kind of things. Within each park, there's a whole bunch of lands, and lands have attractions, and attractions have characters, and characters have creators, and the attractions also have designers. And rather than the sort of strictly hierarchical system of old, what you get is this, what we'd call today a kind of a graph, a very kind of wibbly wobbly jumble of stuff that are connected in very specific ways. So you can say that this attraction was designed by this Imagineer, and this, Winnie the Pooh was created by A.A. Milne, and that sort of, that bit in the middle, that predicate, is the thing that teaches you how those two things are connected. And through that, we could map out any subject. So we could map out natural history, which of course, the Linnaean taxonomy goes back 200 years or more. And we could map out, gardening, we could map out TV programs. And better still, all these different silos within the BBC, we could start to stitch them all together, because all these different domain models could be developed independently, but connected by the things that they had in common. So there was a great example where we showed Mad Men, the TV show Mad Men. It's got that great sort of 60s soundtrack and stuff. And the metadata that we were getting back from the TV playout system for the show gave us the track listings. And we could make all of those track listings linkable to artists in the music domain, if you like. So you could click on Bob Dylan in a track listing on a TV episode of Mad Men, and be taken to the Bob Dylan page that shows all his albums and all the times have been played out on radio and all that amazing information. And it was just like, it was, was someone who also nerds out about theme park architecture. It was exactly like that. It was kind of all these hubs and spokes that were all kind of richly connected together in ways that just made sense.
Exactly. Yeah, it reminds me of back when I did entity relationship diagrams.
Yeah.
And for designing relational databases.
Absolutely. Yeah,
very much, but not exactly that, right? There's that camel case connection you use to connect entities. That's kind of like the way ERDs work, but not exactly. Is that true?
Well, I think that's the important bit of it. The domain-driven design in Eric Evans's book, which is a huge doorstop of a book for software engineers that practice this thing. That was when those named relationship values came into ERDs. I think we're getting very off topic.
Yeah.
For content,
No. Well,
content strategy podcast, but yeah, it was having those values. Mm-hmm. That makes the relationship explicit. We've all seen, like on the, in websites and stuff, you're reading an article and then it has like a bunch of so-called related links. And there's no real clue as to how they are related or what the relationship is. You sort of can intuit it often as a human, mm-hmm. But you can't tell that to a machine that this person is married to that person, or this person, lived in this town or whatever. That would give meaning to those relationships.
Got it. Yeah, no, and you're right. That does go a little far afield, but I do think it's. But that was sort of the core insight that I loved about your work, is that you kind of pulled that whole field into content strategy and make it actionable, because you don't have to understand all that deep level stuff to do a domain model and to.
Right.
And I think one of the powerful things about that domain model, to me anyway, it seems like one of the best hacks for stakeholder alignment. One of the key kind of tasks for any content strategist. Was that intent? How did that emerge? That insight that you're getting literally everybody on the same page as you.
Yeah, well, from 20 years of consulting and working in different corporations, it was very clear that whatever the discipline, the number one complaint people have in the field, the ICs in the field, is how do I let the company do the job that they've hired me to do? And how do we get them to agree on things? But what you find often, and I found this a lot when I was doing more kind of UX design and what have you, and wireframing and all of that, is that you're typically you're putting people on uncomfortable place. You know, you're getting some business executives into a room, and you're pinning a bunch of wireframes on a wall or something, and it's like taking a drawing to your mom and saying, you know, do you like it? And you're asking people to judge things on criteria that they're not necessarily comfortable with. So what's good about sort of the domain modeling techniques is essentially it's research. So rather than going to, you know, a subject matter expert with a page layout or even an article or something and saying, you know, can you review this for me? What, you know, can you judge my picture? What you're doing is you're picking their brains of the things that they know about. So you're saying, right, tell me all about, you know, 401ks and how do they work and how are they different to other investment plans? And you get them on the thing that they're excited about and knowledgeable about, and they feel that they can then contribute to the process on their own terms.
Yeah. One quick thing about that, like I want to go in the weeds a little bit on that. Like, are you typically working? Like, I mean, there's a lot of ways this can unfold,
right,
I'm sure, but like physically getting people in the same room to have the subject matter expert, the technical people, the creative people, the business people, all kind of.
Well, how we've done it is that there's various ways. I mean, we've done like lots of interviews where you would do one-on-one and you have particular things that you want to know. And meanwhile, I mean, particularly if it's a subject domain that you as the content strategist, you know, don't know a lot about, maybe like personal finance or something, or a particular health issue or something. So you're doing a lot of research yourself so that you have the right questions to ask, if you like. And they're helping unpick your understanding and flush out any complexity. And are these two things the same? Are they different? If they're different, how are they different? Is this always true, or are there some exceptions to it? Like you would interrogate anything. And you're building up this picture. And once you have a sort of sense of, okay, I think this is kind of how it works, that's the time to then get not only your SMEs, but also like engineers and designers and you know, the people who are going to build the thing into a room, and you get that. Then it starts to be Post-it notes and Sharpies on a board or bits of string to connect the two things together, and you start mapping. And that is a collaborative and often a creatively combative exercise where you're picking apart you know, how things fit together and what's always true and where the relationships are. But you're only doing that. You're not trying to do that while also trying to do layout or trying to do sort of navigation or anything like that, or even trying to deal with the content that you know you've got. You're just modeling your world. And then the step after that is, okay, how do we sort of pin bits of content from what we've got to this?
So any one piece of content is just a detail about that world.
Well, ideally, yeah. So this is so the theory in the book is that the domain modeling is a great forcing function for, you know, getting rid of content that shouldn't be there, or producing content that should. If you take the premise that there's that quote from, is it Howard Gossage, the ad man, it says, people don't read ads. You know, they read things that interest them, and sometimes it's an ad. Well, people don't read content or watch content because it's content. They do it because they're interested in the things in the content. And if you sort of buy into that they're watching this video not because they like videos, but because they like LeBron James or basketball, right? Then you start to kind of think, okay, my customers are interested in a particular world. What does that world look like? What are the things in that world? And if I make content about each of those things, that will be useful to the person that I'm trying to serve.
Got it.
And that, to me, I mean, you know, there's a lot of like sniffiness of content strategy versus content marketing, but that's what I think content marketing is against sort of regular marketing. I
right.
suppose.
Well, how would you how would you define? Because I think, to my mind, I have a pretty well-established definition of content marketing in my head. That it's like, you know, sort of like non-pushy, non-hypey, objective content that's designed to illustrate you as an expert and maps to a customer journey.
Yeah.
Is that mesh with your?
Super fancy. It's John Deere with the furrow in 1895. It's P&G making As the World Turns. It's you're not making content about your product. You're making content about the things that matter to the people who buy your product.
You just
right?
reminded me, a friend shared on Twitter, she was at a presentation of yours in Europe a month or two ago, and I think you had a slide that said people don't care about your content, they care about what your content is about.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and that's it. Because, anyone who's engaging with digital content, particularly from a brand or something, they're doing, that isn't their end intent. It's a means to a bigger end. It's because they want to buy a car, or it's because they want to sort of plan a pension, or they've come with some particular information-seeking task. Your job is to engage them, and also to sort of keep them as a customer. Peter Drucker said, the purpose of any business is to create and keep a customer. Well, to me, keeping a customer is about keeping them interested in the thing that makes them a customer,
Right.
So again, John Deere, it's they're not about keeping people interested in agricultural machinery. They want to keep people interested in agriculture.
Because that's plowing a field and harvesting
because
crops.
those are the things that keep them interested in the stuff that the company sells.
Yeah.
And we see it, all the time now. Modern brands are doing this. Airbnb are doing it with city guides. MailChimp do it when they put out these guides not on how to use MailChimp, but on how to do better email marketing, because that they know that their very tightly defined customer segment has particular challenges and particular jobs to do. And that's where I think content marketing is that sort of brand drive, a brand relationship drive, because it says we get you, we understand the things that you're going through, and we can help you with that.
Yeah, and stitching that back to content, it's because, a couple things about that. First, I've talked to so many people over the last few years, just literally everybody I meet in any kind of a business context, I'll ask them about what does the term content strategy mean to them. 80-90% of the time they think it's a marketing thing.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of embedded in it, but it's also kind of this scalable thing that you can be strategic about marketing content. But ideally it's happening in a bigger context, right? Is that...
For sure. I think, you're right. People have quite nebulous definitions of both content strategy and content marketing. And I think a lot of people in the content strategy community think of it like things like Outbrain and, clickbait stories and, the stupid kind of lightweight microsites for FMCG brands that we all used to build in the 90s and stay up far too late from agencies for things that would never be seen by anyone other than the client who commissioned them. And so that kind of... but what I think content strategy is real beef with is actually marketing. I think content marketing came about to almost challenge that sort of wastage in marketing, to say, okay, we could do this smarter. We could actually deliver something of value, and use that as sort of as leverage in the relationship building.
Yeah, this just reminded me of some of the threads. Before we went on the air, we were talking about some of the other kind of inputs into content strategy. And there's a couple of things just occurred to me there, kind of Seth Godin permission-based marketing, and then this flip to permission-based, customer-focused marketing.
Yeah.
But also in the computer world, the whole HCDI and other fields where human-centered design as a discipline, it seems like a lot of that stuff is converging.
Yeah, well, a lot. There's certainly. I'm in town for DrupalCon, and there was a great talk by Jeff Eaton yesterday about personalization and the sort of signals to personalization, and we're starting to be able to sort of build up a very targeted picture of what people want, and we can start to serve them, advertising or what have you. At the moment, that exists in the targeting stuff is pretty advanced, but what we do with the targeting is still sort of quite unsophisticated. We'll just throw an ad at them or something, rather than have some valuable kind of useful and usable content in the wings to do that. Not every brand. I have a great case study in one of my presentations about Dyson, the vacuum cleaner people, and they map out their entire customer journey for, I think it's 1,280 days. And they know that, like, after the first week of purchase, they're going to hit you with an email to sort of register your guarantee for the product so that you're covered. They know that after 3 months, you're going to need to change your filter, so that's going to send you an email to remind you to do it. And then later on, there's things like, just household tips, how to get, a wine stain out of a table and stuff like that, because, their relationship with you is about being house proud and household cleaning. You've bought an expensive vacuum cleaner, so you obviously care about keeping your house tidy. And it starts to drift more and more away from being about the product to being about the world of the product.
Right. What you just said, and just thinking about, and I think personalization is one of the things that a lot of people are concerned or thinking about in the field, but it's kind of going to like from, it's almost kind of looping back around. Like a lot of you, especially coming out of the UX world, which is a world you're very familiar with, the development of personas has been so important there. But now it's almost like we want to just kind of start, personalization is like undoing the personas and getting down to the actual individuals.
Yeah, and I don't know whether we've got really a grammar for that. I mean, we've never had the tools to the extent that we do now to target people. And so things like that have become before personas, and then before that sort of broader demographic research like Nielsen type stuff, have always been fairly blunt instruments, and businesses have been built around those blunt instruments because that was the best that they could do. But yeah, when it comes to very like hyper-local, hyper-personalized content, we can absolutely identify the person or the people, but what do you do with them? What do you give them? We haven't quite got the hyper-personalized content.
Have you come across anybody who's doing, because I had a guest on recently, Neil Sofian from a local outfit here called Tuzag, which does sort of medical, it's not really, but they're a medical concierge sort of service where you come in as a consumer and they get like kind of the usual demographic stuff, they get psychographic stuff from like your behavior, and then they have location data and weather data and all that kind of stuff, and they stitch that together, and then they actually serve up personalized content based on that. And they've been working on that for 15 years, and they're finally getting there. But are you aware of others who are beginning to figure out ways to put together that personalized content so we can do more sophisticated?
Not as such, no. I mean, there's a few people who are dealing with kind of interactive narrative. It's a Vox that are doing that kind of thing, where you can start to sort of involve people in a progressive user journey and personalized content along that way. But it's not quite the same thing as targeting, here's like the perfect, completely, absolutely for you. This is your tarot reading. This is your, this is something that's absolutely down to the individual. And it could increasingly be talking about content strategy, that becomes a necessary skill set. I mean, tech comms for years and years have talked about content chunking and reuse and all that kind of thing, and how everything is a sort of dynamic remix of content chunks. Well, still that feels a very crude tool, right? To start to sort of cut and paste something together based on these sort of like Barnum statements almost that are supposed to apply to a particular person.
Well, that kind of gets in the whole world of like data and the highly structured technical content. There's kind of like it's stitching that together with these marketing targeting.
Oh, good Lord. I mean, stitching that together even with the rest of content strategy is challenging at the moment. I mean, content strategy as a field has these, I'm sure there are many kind of camps or different ideas of it, but there are people increasingly within the product space that define it as effectively sort of in-product content development and content guidance and microcopy and that kind of thing. And then there are people who have come to it from the sort of tech comms world, and they're all about structured metadata and DITR and schema.org and that kind of stuff. And again, there's this, I think there's sort of jostling within the communities because these people aren't quite having the same conversation and aren't quite sure whether they're supposed to be,
No, exactly.
But I like to just sort of cherry pick the best of all of it and sort of see
and you've been so good at that, like with the way you stitch it, because a lot of what we're talking about here, I'm like, those seem like kind of like plugins to your domain modeling, and like the idea of figuring out how to incorporate schema into like the overall, like just have that be a part of your any content strategy.
Absolutely, and the hardest part is making it interesting to the people who are increasingly sort of positioned to run with it. We're at a stage, I mean, we nobody has a sort of information architect like within their product team these days. I mean, everyone's sort of, all those kind of skills have fallen between engineering, maybe a bit of PM, and potentially content strategy. But if content strategy, as I would like to see it within the product space, also incorporates like taxonomy and terminology and, the whole kind of ontological kit and caboodle, what is this thing and how is it defined? Then it does start to get under the hood, and it does start to get into these things which bleed out into, software development for the terrified kind of thing.
That's probably a book already. It's like, but it seems like you're the sort of the domain, the work that you've done with and described in designing connected content. It seems like a lot of the stuff you're talking about really is just sort of like additional practices that could be incorporated into that.
That's right. I mean, that when we were writing the book, Carrie and I, that was one of the questions we were asking ourselves. It's like, who is this for, and at what level should it be pitched? And we wanted to aim it at people who were jobbing sort of content strategists, so understood words, understood language, understood the problems that they were having, the things that they were coming up against, these boundaries where it's like, I can't quite structurally get upstream enough. I believe that somehow linguistically this product could be better if it was better like under the hood, but I don't know quite how to get there. And a lot of content strategists, particularly in those teams, are struggling for sort of legitimacy and the seat at the table and all of that still. So we wanted to pitch this book in a way that was explaining these things which seem quite technical to somebody who was non-technical in a way that they could be empowered to act on them. It's like, and you can do it all with like pen and paper or post-it notes and Sharpies and that kind of thing. You're never actually writing code or anything like that. But it's thinking in that structured way that engineers do, and
and then you can communicate. Hey, I want to circle back to one thing. I've been looking for an opportunity to get it back in. It just hasn't come back around. Yeah. But you talked earlier when we were talking, you mentioned Karen McGrain, and I immediately thought it kind of did this little brain loop. But anyhow, I've been working on a blog post. I don't know if and somebody's free to steal this idea. Death to Lorem Ipsum. It's a common sentiment in the world, in this design, in this content first world we're emerging into. But a lot of the conversations about that, like when I Google that phrase and read stuff, there's a lot of conversation about, for the most part, people are like, fake content is no good. You want to model real content. But Karen made an interesting point in a discussion about that like, no, sometimes you want like either gibberish or low or a way to explain that something is low fidelity, because you're as you're prototyping stuff, it's sometimes better to just have something meaningless if you're talking about one thing. But and the way this relates to that whole, I think a lot of the content first conversations I've heard are kind of at the page level or the individual chunk of content level. My hunch is that you would think content first, but content in a nicely organized database that's nicely mapped. And is that? For sure. And not to disagree with Karen at all, because I think that's true. I think it depends what it is that you're, getting feedback on or you're trying to assess, right? And if that's purely layout, then you don't want to get people hung up on the specifics of the content, particularly in a client meeting or something. My sense is that if you have the content in place first, that can organically drive the design of it. I should correct myself. The interface design of it, because that comes from the structural relationships in the content. Right. And one of the big wins of having your content, described a la a domain modeling approach, is that you're not limited to this sort of top-down big bucket classification. You can have much more sort of organic cross-linkings and cross-references between things, but a bit like you do on Wikipedia, for example. And if that becomes sort of like your primary like mode of moving between things, well, that's going to influence how you design an interface around it, right? You don't use Wikipedia with big top-down menus or anything like that, or drill downs. You either search or you're clicking from one thing to the next, and that's the experience. So I believe it's not about factionalism or one
team having to own it over another. But I believe that, if what you're fundamentally presenting is information, is content, be it user-generated or published, then that has its own form, and it has its own way that it wants to be expressed. And that comes from how it's related to one another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. Well, thanks. I'm glad I circled back to that.
Yeah.
And notice we're coming up on time, and it always goes so fast, and I could talk forever. But I always give my guests, is there anything that I haven't brought up, anything that's just on your mind about content strategy, or any insights you got at DrupalCon, or anything like that? Anything last you'd like to share with my folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think content marketing gets a bad rap a lot of the time. Sometimes it is done badly, but doing a thing badly doesn't make that thing bad. But what I'd really like to see is, and where I think there is a limitation, is rather than thinking in traditional campaigns and that sort of short bursts of activity, thinking about what's useful for the long term. What kind of stuff can make you an authority on a subject, and how you build a brand sort of over time. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think we can really sort of start to see these worlds come together. Where business goals are aligned with user goals, are aligned with some differentiation of the information that's out there, and brands can sort of become that ambassador for their subject domain.
No, I agree. That sounds like what a brand will probably be in the future.
Right, I would like to think so. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks so much, Mike. It's been a great conversation. I really enjoyed having you here.
Pleasure.
Yeah. Cheers.
Thank you for listening. If you can think of a friend who might enjoy this episode, please share it with them. And please join us again for our next content strategy interview.